My name is Ronnie Burton, and welcome everyone to a conversation with the Athletic Director brought to you by the Air Force Academy Foundation and the Association of Graduates. Since I can't greet each of you individually, I would like to personally thank all 465 people who are taking the time to learn more about Air Force athletics. Here are a few notes for this afternoon's event. We will have a limited Q&A session at the end using select questions from those we received via email. We want this to be interactive, so be on the lookout for 2 trivia questions. Finally, there will be a survey about the event sent to you after we are finished. We would really appreciate your feedback as we plan more virtual events throughout 2020. And now, I want to introduce the first single CEO to oversee both the Air Force Academy Foundation and the Association of Graduates from the class of 1976, Lieutenant General Mike Gould.
Well, thank you, Ronnie, and welcome to all of you. Your Association of Graduates and Air Force Academy Foundation is happy to bring this fourth conversation now that we've had with Academy leadership. And we're honored to have the 13th Athletic Director in Air Force Academy history, Mr. Nate Pine, to visit with y'all and share some news about some things that are happening here at the Academy. Nate comes to us with an impressive resume in college athletics, and we are just thrilled to have him as our AD. Hopefully, Nate will be able to clarify what's a pretty fuzzy picture right now as the Academy and all of college sports gets ready to launch into the fall of 2020 season, or at least we hope so. And Nate will give you the latest on what's going on. I tell you what's really important, though, is the fact that you are engaged, and your support of our athletes at the Academy is more important now than ever. So much turmoil in our country and a lot of emotion going around. But your cadets need you, and so thanks for being informed. I want to add 2 more things. One, in the spirit of competition, which our athletic programs are all about, from 16 to 20 August, just next week, we will be launching the All Academy Challenge, and this is competition between Air Force, Army, Navy, and Merchant Marines and Coast Guard, to see who can raise the most money percentage-wise for their respective academies. So I want you all to log on to allacademychallenge.com and find a way to give a little bit just to support your cadets. Final note that I would mention is keep your eyes open for coming news on a Falcon Stadium renovation. This is going to be a transformational improvement to our facilities here at the Academy, and we want you all to get involved in that as well. So enjoy the session this afternoon. I'll pitch it back over to Ronnie, and thank you again for tuning in.
Once again, I'm Ronnie Burton. I'm the Major Gift Officer here with the Air Force Academy Foundation, and we're here having a conversation with our Athletic Director, Mr. Nathan Pine. Of course, technical difficulties happen, so that kind of goes with the territory. As you guys can imagine on Zoom, things can kind of go haywire, but we appreciate you guys spending time with us and kind of going with it. And with that, I think we might be able to go into our trivia question. I don't know thus far, but I know that Nate is here right now, so maybe it might just be apropos for us to move directly into our keynote speaker. So I would like to introduce our Athletic Director, Mr. Nathan Pine. He's been the Director of Athletics here since spring of 2019. Prior to that, he was the Athletic Director at Holy Cross from 2013 to 2019. He's also held senior leadership positions at the University of Maryland, at Cal Berkeley, and also at West Point, our daunted rivals, but we won't hold that against him. Anyway, Mr. Pine, we appreciate your time, and the floor is all yours.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ronnie, and thanks for the invitation to join the group today. Appreciate everybody taking the time to join us, and apologize again for the technical difficulties. So as we look at this summer, I thought maybe a good guide for our conversation today would be to take you through some of the summer and our COVID processes to help you understand where we are today on campus, and then also maybe a little bit of a preview of what we're looking at the fall, even though that's ever developing. But if we take a step backwards, I think the summer has really put us in a strong position here at the Academy. We started intake of cadets the second week in June. It started with the cadet cadre who are going to be working BCT. And then we also followed that up with cadets who are going to be taking academic coursework and airmanship classes. And so that continued throughout the month of June and into July. And it really helped us to have confidence in our protocols and how we're operating today. We took the last group of 1,300 cadets in the last week of July. And that means we have our full cadet population here on campus in different phases of their covert experience. The other neat thing that enabled us to do is to bring in all of our fall sport athletes who potentially weren't part of the cadre or weren't part of an academic course or an airmanship course. We were able to bring them in and start working on training and acclimatizing to our new norm. And it's a weird one. You can see I'm wearing a mask here today. I'm back in the office here, coming to you live from the conference room. As we have had more cadets come back to campus, we've also had staff a little bit more in-person posture to support them. But what we've been able to do is we had a very strict in-processing. And so when cadets hit campus, they received COVID tests on day 0, 7, 10, and 14. And that was part of a Department of Defense posture on how they were going to work in this environment. We also had a restricted movement period for 14 days where our cadets stayed in small groups of 30. We did that for contact tracing purposes so that if we did have a positive test, we were able to limit the spread of that and also make sure that we got ahead of it on campus. And that's put us in a good spot here today. We learned some of these lessons from Lackland and from Keesler, where they continued with their basic training protocols. We took some of and adapted some of their lessons learned into our intake and into our ROM process. I think that's really helped us. I want to be clear, though, I would say very candidly, and when we have publicly, we don't have it all figured out here at USAFA. We've got a good process in place that is working well for us. It's keeping our cadet population, our permanent population healthy. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have positive tests potentially from the outside. And when we do, we're going to have to adjust, and we're going to have to be very vigilant on our Q&I processes to make sure that we don't have community spread. So while they're working here, and I think that we're certainly the envy of our Mountain West colleagues in the way that we're approaching it and the resources and the fidelity that we have to our plans and protocols, we don't have it all figured out. And so we're going to have to be able to be flexible and adapt when necessary. We've also, because of this very strict in processing, we've also doubled down on our mask wearing when we're in the office and in public places. That's a requirement in the state of Colorado. We've also been very vigilant on our social distancing and our hand washing and having a lot of hand sanitizers around all of our facilities, and also increasing our cleaning of those facilities. And in doing so, we've been able to keep a healthy population. And that's enabled us to keep the Cadet Fitness Center open, our pool open, and our varsity weight rooms open to support physical fitness of our population. And that's something that hasn't been able to happen on the outside. And we've worked really hard to keep ourselves in a good position to do that. We've also been working very closely with our academic PhDs on modeling coronavirus and the spread through our community. And so through that modeling, we've helped adapt our processes, but we've also gained confidence that we're going to be able to stay ahead of this. We're going to be able to quarantine and isolate when we do have small micro outbreaks so that we can continue to keep a healthy population, because we are going to be in person here at the Academy next academic year. There'll be a combination of remote and in-person coursework that will include some of our PE classes. But we are going to have intramurals, and we are going to have fitness testing, and we are going to have varsity athletics if we're in a position to do that. And in order to, we've got to be very vigilant. So I feel really good about where we sit here the first week of August. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride this summer, some ups and downs. I think there was a lot of optimism early in June about return to play in the fall. That seemed to wane a little bit as we hit the 4th of July weekend, and there were some large gatherings, and we've seen positive tests spike throughout our country. And so that's given folks a little bit of pause as we've looked at how we might be proceeding into the fall. But as we speak today, the NCAA Board of Governors is meeting in Indianapolis. They're actually meeting remotely, but having conversations about fall championships. And we've been having constant conversations as a Mountain West Conference throughout the summer of how we're going to adjust and how we're going to try, as long as we can do it safely, have fall sports in some form or fashion. I feel that we owe that to our cadets. We don't have the opportunity at 5th years and extended eligibility in the way that other schools do. And so our firsties deserve nothing less than for us to give it the very best effort we can to play in the fall. I think the next position would be, if we have to play things in the spring. And then the ultimate decision would be if we're not able to play at all. And that's the last case scenario. And I feel that certainly at the academy, we're positioned to be far more aggressive than that and be able to perform it in a safe manner. So tell you a little bit about kind of how we're looking at this. The Mountain West Conference presidents are going to have a conversation tomorrow based on the feedback that comes out of Indianapolis today. We have put forward some recommendations as a group of athletic directors on how we think we can move into the fall. The ultimate decision obviously sits with our presidents, and they will do a great job of weighing all of the different factors before we decide how we move forward. But if I'm looking at it today, we might have to delay the start of games and push them back slightly into September based on what we're seeing right now nationally. If you've been following the news, the SEC, the Big 12 just announced on Monday, the ACC and the Pac-12 are similarly postured, as is the Big 10, that they're looking to reduce the number of non-conference games because they feel confident regionally and also in testing protocols that could be managed very well at the conference level. We're looking at that, though I expect we'll have a slight adjustment. Certainly for us at the Air Force Academy, it's important to protect the opportunity to play and beat both Army and Navy. And so we're working hard with our conference partners to leave that door open for us. But I do see probably a reduced number of competitions if we're looking realistically at where we are nationally right now with COVID and the ability to host events safely. And that at the end of the day is what it boils down to, the ability to host events safely. And so I could see that sliding in the Mountain West back a little bit into September. I could also see us reducing the number of competitions in some of our fall Olympic sports because of that later start date to include football. So I think we're going to have to be flexible a little bit. I expect that we'll have a plan that we can announce here this week coming out of the Mountain West. So you'll know where we stand similar to other conferences. And then we're going to have to remain flexible because that's a plan today in August and early August. And by the end of August, we'll have a much better idea of how we're doing and rolling into competitions here in the month of September. So please continue to be patient. I'll share with you, we've had some encouraging conversations with the public health folks here in El Paso County. We've walked them through some of the modeling that we've gone through for Falcon Stadium and our other fall venues. And we've had very good feedback from them on our processes and our plans. So currently we're modeling at 25%. I believe that the decisions on fan attendance is going to be left to the local public health organizations because it looks a little bit different in all the different corners of the Mountain West and all of the different corners of the other conferences that we're talking with. So I think we're going to have the ability to work with our local folks, and we've already been heavily engaged with them in conversations. I'll tell you the other thing that we've done here in Colorado. I've been in close contact with Rick George at Colorado and Joe Parker at Colorado State, and we've been engaged with the governor's office and the Department of Higher Ed on how we're approaching return to sports safely in the state of Colorado. And we've gotten good feedback and dialogue on those fronts to help us refine and develop our plans, not only here at the Air Force Academy, but in the entire state of Colorado and how we might be looking at football. And so that's been very helpful and positive dialogue, and we're going to continue that here through the month of August, but trying to draw on all the different resources that we have available to us, the subject matter experts, and make sure we're doing this in a very methodical, but also a very safe manner. The other piece, and I mentioned it earlier, preserving the opportunities, if available, to compete against Army and Navy. And I've been in constant conversation with both of those athletic directors on a weekly basis, talking about the environment and how we're approaching the summer and practice on our campuses, but also how we're looking at the fall. Both Army and Navy are members of the Patriot League, and the Patriot League announced early, or I guess about mid-July, their intention to postpone all fall sports and compete all their fall sports in the spring. So Army and Navy have been given an exclusion to that. They have the ability to play in the fall if they can find competition. And so we've continued to keep that door open about the possibility of looking to schedule games against the two service academies in our fall sports, especially if we're playing in the fall, whereas they're positioned in the spring. So more to come on that. There's a lot of moving parts. What we put forward today as a plan is going to have to continue to be flexible, but I do feel encouraged that we're talking about plans and we're talking about a focus on the fall. And just a few short weeks ago, that seemed a little more daunting. So headed in the right direction. But I told folks and I told our cadets when I spoke with all of our ICs here earlier this week, we've all have a role to play in return to play. And part of that is taking this seriously and wearing our masks, setting a good example, washing our hands, maintaining social distancing, because we have to have our local communities safe in order to have games played in these communities, but also have a potential at having crowds to be here to support our cadet athletes. So please help us in joining and doing your part. I'll pause there. I know we had a number of questions, but before I turn it over to Ronnie for a few of those questions, I'd like to hit something here right as I'm addressing the group. I've heard from a number of you, both positive and negatively in reaction to some of our team messages around social awareness and specifically around Black Lives Matter. We've had a number of teams publish videos through their official accounts and things that I want you to know directly from me. I have supported our teams and our coaches in those efforts. We have been in communication with our lawyers here on campus about what our left and right boundaries are and some of that dialogue, but it's important dialogue, and especially when we're talking about social unrest and equality. And so we have made sure to stay within the boundaries of our legal parameters. We also have made sure, and I want to make this perfectly clear, we are not endorsing any organizations in this messaging. We are supporting dialogue and we are supporting concepts, and we want to talk about dignity, respect, and equality. And so very clearly, we're not supporting any organizations. We're supporting concept and we're supporting further dialogue. And I think it's important. It's important not only to our players and our coaching staffs, it's important to the communities that we're recruiting in and the conversations that we're having in homes. And it's also important to our letter winners and our former players. And so a lot of positive feedback from a number of folks. And I've also certainly heard and understood the negative feedback that comes along with it. But wanted you to hear that directly from me. It was important for us to have these messages in a timely fashion. And when you work in a timely fashion and respond to things that are happening nationally, that's going to be imperfect. If you react quickly, it's not going to be a perfect message. And I understood that, and so did our coaching staff and our cadet athletes, and we own that. But it's important to have authentic dialogue, and it's important to encourage the continuation of that dialogue. And it's also important to know that these are the same messages that were shared and almost the exact same words that were shared by General Goldfein and Chief Wright around the topic just a few weeks before. And so I think our cadet athletes are finding their voice. Our coaches are certainly showing their support, and we're continuing to have some of those difficult dialogues here at the Academy. And I can encourage you to do that in your communities too, but wanted you to understand where we were coming from and hear directly from me where we were with not an endorsement of any one organization, but certainly a support of the concept. Please, Ronnie, over to you.
Hey, we appreciate it, Nate. It sounds like you've been really, really busy like many athletic administrators across the country, and we appreciate your leadership in this time and that update. We said that this was going to be a little bit interactive, so we're going to move into some of our poll questions at this time. So we'll head into question number one. This is what it is. The Air Force Academy has 27 intercollegiate sports. Of these, how many are women's? All right, it looks like we gave people enough time to answer. The correct answer is indeed 10. So if you answered 10, you're correct. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. And I think we're going to do one more question. You know, at the Air Force Academy, we have a lot of women's sports, and it really provides a really cool opportunity. So, you know, that's awesome to see the number of sports that we have. So let's move on to question number 2. All right, this is a good one for you, Mr. Pine. How many athletic directors have there been at USAFA? All right, let's see what our audience voted. Okay, the correct answer is actually 12. And so, Mr. Pine, I think it's very apropos. You're lucky number 13.
You know, Ronnie, that actually explains a lot right now in what we're wading through here this summer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Like we stated earlier on in the beginning of this Zoom, we have some questions that were pre-submitted via email that we're going to go through right now. So I'm going to start off with a few of those. So, Mr. Pine, are you prepared and ready?
Absolutely, Ronnie.
All right, let's go for question number 1. What have you found surprising or unexpected in your transition to the role as a Service Academy Athletic Director?
I think one of the things that I had seen certainly before in my time at West Point, but the academies do it very differently than just about any other institution. The three of us, even between the 3 academies, we all do it slightly differently. So I think that's the biggest thing to adjust. When you look at the different categories of personnel that you have throughout the athletic department, when you look at the different funding sources that you have throughout the different channels of the athletic department, basically you've got 3 different schools all combined into one, and there's a lot of strings attached and regulations that go along with that. We certainly have appropriated funds and federal dollars, and so you know we're one of a small number of federal institutions, and so that has some nuance to it. And then we have non-appropriated funds, and those operate, you know, historically very much like state institutions and large state schools, and the strings attached and how those funds and personnel are dealt with. And then we also have a corporation and a 501c3 that gives us the ability to operate in some ways like a private school. And so you got to figure out a way to successfully manage and merge all 3 of those personnel and funding systems into what can work for us here at the Academy. So that takes some getting used to. I ask a lot of questions. We have a great staff in place that helps to concentrate on the different areas. But really, you know, at the end of the day, the job is mine to make sure that we treat our department as one department and we manage it the best we can, integrating all 3 of those different areas into one. So it works well for us. It's certainly the way we need to be set up. And really the challenge is how to continue to refine and make our organization better and more efficient. Ron, before we move on to the next one, I did want to thank the audience and give them a little context. So we had to pre-submit our questions, and that's an NCAA compliance factor as we look at an ability to do a broadcast like this, because we can have potential parents of student athletes, potential cadet athletes. From an NCAA compliance standpoint, we needed to have this pre-selected so that we don't have a recruiting type of interaction from taking questions as we go. So appreciate you bearing with us and submitting those in advance so that we can make sure we maintain NCAA compliance, but also give folks a window into the operations and what's going on, and make sure that we're answering your questions and covering the bases that you wanted to hear about today.
Yeah, thanks for that insight, Nate. I mean, NCAA rules, everyone has to comply with them, and there are things that we have to do in college athletics just to make sure that everyone's doing the right thing and there's no recruiting advantages in terms of even when we're giving out information. So thanks for that little tidbit. All right, so question number 2. I think a lot of people will like this one because it has something to do with facilities, but what projects and upgrades do you see as the key to the future of the department and athletic landscape?
It's a great question. In college athletics, you need to be smart about where you're making investments, but you also have to show continuous improvement. And so this is a big piece of it. I think that I would focus on our comprehensive campaign that we are starting to enter here at the Academy. It'll be the first one in our history. And so it's a big one for us. And the athletic component of that as you alluded, has three big bricks and mortar projects that we're going to focus on as true athletic department needs. The first is a renovation of Falcon Stadium. We've got a beautiful stadium, and it's served us well, but it's time for some upgrades. And folks that have been in the stadium here in the last year or so have seen us continue to improve it, but now it's time for a little bit larger overhaul. So we're going to focus on that as one of the main components of our capital campaign and put energy and effort into that. And then we'll continue to upgrade small things as we go. But it'll start on the east side, but there'll be a gradual progression of improvements that we're looking to do there. The second capital campaign project that we're going to focus on is in Clune Arena, and it's a multi-purpose club space overlooking both hockey and basketball. And we need it from a atmosphere and a fan amenities standpoint, but we also need it from a large meeting space, being able to do training tables and study tables and some things in a larger gathering than what we currently have would be very helpful. So it'll be multifaceted and affecting a bunch of different groups to benefit us here on campus. And then, as we said, in a COVID environment, obviously square footage becomes important to be able to space us out and make sure that we can do things in a safe manner. So that'll be another project that'll have importance here on the near horizon. And then the third piece of the capital campaign for athletics is going to be a baseball stadium. As you look across, I think that would be the one that I would point to in our facilities that probably needs addressed as much as any, and one that we have continued to do small projects, but it's time for a bigger overhaul of our baseball stadium and building a proper clubhouse and changing and locker room facilities underneath. Also a little bit better on the fan amenities and the cover would be important. So that's an important project. All three of those will be equally prioritized. It'll be donor intent and where people want to invest, which ones they think are most important, that will probably raise or lower the speed of which those ones get checked off the list. But those are the three that we're most focused on priority-wise. And in the meantime, again, as I said a couple times, we'll do smaller projects and upgrades to facilities to continue to give our cadet athletes the best experience that we possibly can, our fans a great experience, and also make sure that we're doing the very best we can from a developmental and a training standpoint.
Definitely, the future is bright for Air Force athletics, and if anyone's ever interested in supporting, you can always go to the Air Force Academy Foundation or either the Air Force Academy Athletic Corporation. Everyone's looking, and we're always available to if you're interested in supporting. And with this new era kind of coming about, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to support. So we appreciate all those that are givers that are on the call, and also those who are interested. Like I said, you can either go through AFAC or the Air Force Academy Foundation, and we work in tandem to help make all this stuff work. So we appreciate your support.
Well, that's a big piece, Ronnie, and I want to make sure that we talk about that a little bit here with our town hall population, because the foundation is in lockstep with the athletic department, especially on those three projects that I just mentioned, and the ability to go out and engage our alumni population, making sure that our athletic department staff and our coaches are in lockstep with our frontline fundraisers, just like you, who are out there engaging our graduate community and our friends of the program to help us do these big, lofty, and exciting projects. And so that connectedness is really important. And let the AFAC focus on the operational dollars and bringing money in to support the day-to-day development of our cadet athletes and do the smaller projects that we talked about that really have an impact and give coaches the discretion and the ability to do things that they think are important to move their programs forward, and making sure that we are aligned in our goals, but also aligned in our efforts to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts has been something that was real priority for me in arriving and getting the lay of the land and understanding how the organizations have operated historically, but probably more important, how we're going to work very closely together to operate effectively moving forward.
Definitely, Nate. I mean, it's going to be awesome to work in tandem together as we look to take the academy to a whole nother level, especially athletically. So we appreciate your leadership on that, and it's going to be fun, like I said, as we move into the future. All right, so here comes another question that's a little bit more future-facing, and we've seen a lot of this within college athletics, but do you foresee a future round of conference realignment, and how might Air Force fit into that landscape?
That's a great question, and I don't think we have one either donor Zoom call or or fan forum where we don't get some form of that question. So it's certainly top of folks' minds. I think I guess the first way I would react to that is I think the COVID environment that we're dealing with now this summer, last spring with the cancellation of sports, has shined a spotlight on schools' financing and funding of athletic departments, but also those departmental aspirations and how realistic that is long term. So I think it will have a refocusing of where athletic departments spend their money and how they try to operate in conjunction with their peers, some for good and some for bad. I think some institutions are realizing they just don't have the ability to sustainably spend at the rate they have been to keep up with their peers. And so I do think that in time there will be probably a reset and a readjustment. We saw it, heck, it's probably been, I think, about 8 years ago now with the last of the major shifts. I would foresee and share with the group that you're probably looking at 24 or 25 when the next large media rights deals come up in your Power 5 conferences, before you might see a reshuffling of the deck of the major schools, because most of those conference schools have an assignment of rights that go along with their conference membership. It's not advantageous for them to leave before the end of that television contract because the rights remain with the conference. So that's one way to look at it. I think whether you either see a growth in the Power 5 and really a big stark drop off in the other institutions, or if you see some that maybe kind of break away of a smaller group. Right now, the Power 5, when we talk about the Big 5 conferences of the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, the ACC, and the Pac-12, that's a total of 65 schools. And so those schools and what they're spending is quite significant. And then there's a little bit of a gap between the group of 5. And so we sit there in the Mountain West Conference, the American Athletic Conference. There's 5 other FBS playing football conferences. And so I think that you could see some shuffling either back and forth of them, potentially even a break off of a smaller subset of those bigger schools, and then a reshuffling of the deck in the conference landscape. So that is a little bit unknown. I guess the best way to answer that question is, historically, if you look over the last 100 years, there's going to be change in conference alignments in college athletics. That's part of the equation, and there's different priorities that drive that. The most important thing for us at the Air Force Academy is to have a thriving and a sustainable athletic department, an athletic model that can transition into opportunities that arise that might be interesting to us. And so making sure that we have successful programs that are well funded and that are reflective of the Academy's mission is priority number one. And that's going to then put us in the conversation to make decisions that we want to as it pertains to conference alignment. The Mountain West serves us well now. We certainly have had tremendous success in the Mountain West. But we also talk about the Learfield Cup and how we stand up against the top programs in the country. And we have aspirations of being a top 50 Learfield Cup program. The Learfield Cup, Directors Cup, measures the programmatic success. And so that's across the board, the breadth of our 27 programs and how many of those programs are getting into postseason competition. And so it's a very good way to be able to measure your entire athletic department and see how it stacks up against the other Division I programs. And so we have aspirations of being a top 50 program, and that would mean us punching way above our weight, especially when we talked about 65 of those schools and the significant resources that they put into athletics. We would be beating a number of them on an annual basis. We're not there yet, but those are the type of things that we're talking about and working toward that I think are going to position us well whenever realignment comes along next.
Well, you mentioned it, Nate. I mean, we have 27 sports, and I would say we're one of the top in the country in terms of number of sport offerings. So there's going to be a huge opportunity for us to be successful, whether that's in the group of 5 or the Power 5. Time will be determined. But right now, we're really doing a great job with the 27 sports we have, and we're proven winners across, our whole, sport offering. So that's always good to see. All right, so we're going to head into another question. You hit on this a little bit earlier in regards to the Patriot League, but if you could go a little bit further into that, that would be great. But essentially, as you know, the Patriot League canceled all fall athletics, and Army and Navy were given exemptions to pursue other competitive opportunities as considered appropriate by the superintendents. How would that look in And when you talk about making the same request to the Mountain West Conference, how would we go about something if, let's say, the Mountain West were to cancel fall sports, and once again, we have Army and Navy in those schools that we can go and compete against?
Yeah. Well, I think thankfully, as I shared earlier, we're not in a position of canceling fall sports. So I think we're actually leaning forward and making sure that we're putting the processes and protocols in place to compete safely this fall. So hopefully that's not a topic of discussion on the near horizon, but I think we would approach it similar to how the other academies did with the Patriot League, talking about it being fundamental and core to our mission and having the ability to compete. See, Army and Navy are in a little bit of a limbo right now, because if the NCAA allows fall championships to move forward, the Patriot League and other leagues that have canceled their fall sports are not going to participate in those championships. And so Army and Navy, as you look at the Patriot League, might be the only schools that can play some competitions in the fall and have the ability to represent their conference. We're trying to keep the door open right now. They're struggling a little bit in my conversations with Chet Gladchuk and Mike Buddy to find competitions, because you see the consolidation of most of these conferences to playing conference-only teams. It's going to be really tough for those schools that are right now treated like an independent and trying to find games. And so we're trying to keep the door open, because it's important to the academies for the three of us to play each other, for us to maybe have an opportunity to play them in some fall sports, because they might be the only games they get outside of each other. And so that is one way to look at it. I think in a worst case scenario, we would have similar conversations with our colleagues in the Mountain West if we were forced to it, because it is fundamental. We do have good processes in place, and we have a healthy population. And when you look across the three service academies, I think we're going to have the ability to compete safely in a way that other institutions can't, because they don't have a closed loop system in the way that we do.
Awesome. Thanks again for that insight. Like we have some really unique strengths here at the academy, and things do go differently. At least we know that competition will still go on, because it's part of that warrior ethos that we have here. And that's a huge part of the pillars here at the academy, competition and intercollegiate athletics. So thank you again for that insight. All right, we got another question that really goes towards, once again, some of the schools that offer a lot of sports. So with more schools like Stanford eliminating minor non-revenue NCAA sports, how do you view the future of club sports? And specifically, do you see the athletic department eventually granting varsity status to club sports like rugby and team handball?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that the club sports roll up under our cadet wing and our commandant. And so we work very closely. Obviously, there's access to athletic department facilities that have to be worked out, and a lot of support there that cross-functionally goes back and forth. And so we are closely aligned in the way that we approach them. I think when you talk about it, you kind of hit the nail on the head. You're seeing a lot of departments. Stanford probably raised the most eyebrows because of the size of their endowment, but you're seeing a lot of sports programs nationally downsize the number of offerings that they have, and that's really being driven by finances and folks that have been holding on for a long time and trying to provide those opportunities, just not being able to do it now in a reduced revenue environment. And so I think you've seen a good number of those. I would be naive to say we've seen the last of them, because I think we're still working on this next academic year, and there's a lot of campuses that are struggling and not in a position like we are to have students back in some version of in-person and remote coursework. So I think there's a lot of schools that are still trying to figure it out, and we're still trying to figure it out ourselves here at the academy. But a long-winded way of saying I don't see the trend being to migrate club sports into varsity sports status. In fact, nationally, the trend is going very much the opposite way. We would be open to those conversations if we were able to put together appropriate funding to where we had an endowed program. Certainly if there was a distinct advantage or a preference to go to a varsity status and it had a legitimate impact on that sport and their ability to compete for a national title, we'd be open to the conversation. But the funding piece is always going to have to be in lockstep with that. And I think that was probably the most interesting piece of the Stanford decision, because we all know the quality of that endowment, and yet if a program like Stanford needed to make those challenging and tough decisions, I think it opened everybody's eyes to no one is immune to that, even with great endowments. There's pressures on funding and revenue right now that we haven't seen, certainly in my last 20 years of working in Division I athletics.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight once again. I mean, just another little follow-up there. A lot of people are very passionate about sports like rugby, and I know that West Point has as a sponsored sport there, but there are always different hoops to kind of jump through to get from that club status to that varsity status, and sometimes it's not as linear as people think. If you could go just a little bit into that process so people have a little bit more context, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about the example in the sport of rugby, there's just a handful of varsity programs in the country, and that's not a men's rugby. If we're talking the world of men's rugby, is not a NCAA sponsored sport. And so, my experience at Cal Berkeley, it's quite a rugby program, and having a little bit of time at West Point when they were putting that endowment and trying to transition that program. Understand the desire, but sometimes those things can absolutely be achieved in a similar fashion at the club level, and it's really going to depend on funding. When you shift gears over into the women's side, we would obviously look to entertain that conversation in lockstep. Women's rugby is an emerging sport in the NCAA, and so there would be an access to championships that would look different in the sport of women's rugby than men's rugby. And so all of those factors come into the conversation as you talk about. One is their donor capacity and interest to fund a sport at a level to where it would be a cost neutral endeavor. That's a tough thing to do. And certainly when you look at the full scope of a program and what it costs to run it, those are significant dollars in investment. So that's usually a starting point. But then the other point is, how's it going to change that program for the better? And is there really a difference other than name in the way we approach it?
Definitely. We appreciate you, giving more insight on that too, because it's always a question that comes up. How can we make a club sport into a varsity sport? And, to have that insight, I think it gives a lot more clarity to people who have that interest, but still you can reach the same goals as a club sport, if it's funded the right way. And a lot of that stuff, like we said, is under the commandant here. And we have great club sports too, that really, like we said, that warrior ethos, it really matches, the institution's values and our pillars. So our club sports are very, very successful. All right. So we've got one more question. And this one's a little bit more tangible. I know that you're not a coach, but knowing our student athletes and our cadet athletes, what is the percentage of cadets that actually make a team as a walk-on?
It's a challenging question. There's a lot of parts to it too, Ronnie, but it's a good question. And so I think that it's worth digging in a little bit deeper. I think the realistic answer is it's a low number of walk-ons. Because of the way Division I athletics have evolved, the amount of film, the amount of travel teams, the amount of youth development programs, there's not very many unknowns in college athletics. And so our coaches are scouring the country for young men and women that have the athletic aptitude, have the academic aptitude, and are interested in the service commitment that comes with the academy. And so our coaches do an outstanding job on the recruiting trails of making sure we understand who's interested and what that talent looks like. So kudos to them. That doesn't mean that we don't have late bloomers or folks from areas that maybe didn't play on some of those travel and high exposure teams that do slip through the cracks in the radar. And so most of our programs do have a walk-on opportunity, but it's a low number that make those rosters. I will say sports where you do have a little bit bigger roster, you have more opportunity for walk-on spots than what you might see like on a golf team or a very small roster sport. So a little bit of that is sport dependent, but I encourage folks that have either grandchildren or children that are interested in the academy and in conversations about walk-on. The first contact you need to make is with that coaching staff, letting them know of your interest, sending them video and tape of your capabilities, and starting that dialogue. And then if it does turn into admissions and then a walk-on opportunity, those are happening about this time of year as you get into your fall camps. And then once classes start, young men and women have the opportunity to engage with the coaching staff and have a tryout, if you will, to see if they can make those varsity teams. The other piece of that question that I said makes it tough is, there's a lot of competing interests and challenges for your time here at the academy. And so maintaining a spot on a roster for 4 years is a significant challenge in itself, even for our highest recruited ICs. And so a lot of times you'll see a walk-on that'll have an opportunity maybe early in their career, but then migrate and find other interests, be it in club sports or intramurals or research or development on the military side, where that starts to pull them away. And so when you look at it, probably a number of walk-ons that make 4 years, it's a very, very small number. But opportunities do exist. And sometimes that opens up networks for friendships and networks for connections into other things that gauge their interests and become deep connections for their time at the academy.
Well, I always say that the beauty about the academy here is everyone's on a scholarship. So it's not like you're fighting for that 85 scholarships if you're a Division I football player, or those 13 scholarships in basketball, or even maybe a partial scholarship in a non-revenue producing sport. Here, everyone's on a scholarship because they're going to go out and serve in the United States Air Force, and that presents a really cool opportunity. And like you said, academics and your military commitment come first. So there are a lot of kids and cadet athletes that come in and they want to compete. And then sometimes just because of all the other dueling priorities that you have, they decide to focus more on the military and the academic end. But still, huge opportunities here because there isn't that scholarship limitation, because everyone here gets in on their own merit. And like we said, you have intramurals, you have club sports. You'll get your athletic competition in if it doesn't necessarily happen on the field, but also you'll also get an opportunity if you're interested to play an intercollegiate sport. So numerous chances to really get involved here athletically at the academy.
So you're absolutely right, Ronnie. And though we don't have scholarship limitations, we do have roster limits, and we have to work within, because that again feeds into the financial model, and that's a piece of it. The other part is from a developmental standpoint. Our coaches can only meaningfully work with a certain number, depending on how big that coaching staff is. So we want to be mindful about that too, making sure that we put our coaches, our cadet athletes, and our teams in the very best position to be successful. And so we are vigilant about making sure that we manage those rosters to a number that makes sense on all of those fronts.
Awesome. It's all about managing reps. And if you have too many bodies, sometimes those practice reps and the things that you need to do can't necessarily happen. But we appreciate your insight on that. I know some of the parents who are on the call who might have a cadet that's here and they're a fourth degree, that they might be trying to make that decision. So we really appreciate your insight. But Nate, well, our time has kind of gone by quickly this afternoon. Once again, apologies for the technical difficulties a little bit earlier. So our fault on that, but we appreciate you staying with us. I hope you're able to have a little bit of fun and learn more about Air Force athletics. Please don't forget, we're going to send out the survey at the end of this, at the conclusion. So we really need to have your feedback. More virtual events are going to be going down here in 2020. And with that, I'll let you, Mr. Pine, have the final word.
All right. Well, thank you again, Ronnie, for the invitation and the opportunity today to participate in the town hall. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and hearing a little bit about how we've approached the summer and are thinking about the fall. And buckle up. It's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, and it'll look different than it has in years past. But I'm very hopeful and optimistic that we're going to be in a position to resume some competitions here shortly and have a meaningful athletic and academic year upcoming. So thank you very much for your time today. Please, again, wear your masks, distance yourself socially, wash your hands, help us start to get ahead of this thing in our communities and make sure that we're in the best position to play sports here this year. Have a great day. Go Falcons.